Well, we've just come to the end of a momentous 10 days in UK history and a tumultuous 2 weeks in British politics. A fortnight ago, Liz Truss was settling into her first evening at Downing Street. Today, she's at the UN in New York, returning to the economic policies that may define her time in office, and only now able to resume her launch plan for the government that she still has not even finished appointing. So what a time to be taking a much longer view, and after a week of wall-to-wall documentaries, to consider the role that public personas and documentary making have on our politics. And what better person to discuss that with than the master of political filmmaking, Michael Cockerell.
Thank you.
Michael has been making documentaries about our politics and our government for over 50 years. He has interviewed 12 former prime ministers, almost as many as the late Queen. And we are very...
3 more than me.
Yes, she did. We are very pleased to have him with us this evening. And I should say, if you're watching at home, please do send in your questions using the Q&A function. For those in the room, we will have a roving mic for questions later, and we'll be tweeting at IFG events using the hashtag IFGCockerell. We will also have a video and sound recording on the events, of the event on our website within 24 hours, which I think will be one to watch back, because we've also got a number of clips that Michael has been very generous to share with us and that he will be talking about this evening. Michael, before we get into that, I just want to ask, I mean, you've had a front row seat for a huge sweep of British political history. How has the last 10 days compared to what you've seen before?
Madness. Complete madness. I mean, everything, ever since Boris Johnson became leader of the Tory party, everything's been going at warp speed, but it's speeded up even faster than Boris could make it. It's just... For a journalist, there have been new stories sort of on the hour, every hour, instead of stories which last for 3 days and things like that. It's a very, very difficult world, but what's happened in the last 10 days just been extraordinary.
Yeah.
And you couldn't, you know, I think it's been like a Netflix box set, the Boris years, and subsequently, written by a scriptwriter on speed, channeling Shakespeare, Monty Python, and The Sopranos. All 3 of them all come and there's the brutality, and there's the tragedy, and then there's the tragicomedy of Boris Johnson. You can put a crown on a clown, but he's still a clown.
We will get to looking a bit more intensely at Boris Johnson a bit later. So start talking us through the clips. I think you wanted to start with one from Harold Macmillan.
Yeah, we go back to 1961, when the BBC was celebrating 25 years of television. And in those days, the BBC was much more self-confident than they are now. And they hired the Grocers' Hall, one of the city livery companies, with a vast hall, and invited the Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, who was just coming to terms with this new invention of television. And they invited him to make the speech on this 25th anniversary. So if we're ready, if you could cue clip 1. This is the Grocers' Hall in London.
It is in airports that television chooses to lurk. If you go by sea, if you go by road, if you go by rail, nobody bothers you very much. But if you go by air, there it is, that hot, pitiless, probing eye. After 14 hours of travel, you get off the aeroplane wanting only a shave and a bath. Oh no, you are cornered. The lights in your eyes, the camera's whizzing. You put up your hand to shade your eyes. And the next day, there you are, in the Daily Clarion, looking weary, old, worried, action which implies that you are past it.
What timing? What timing? I mean, he was the actor, manager, prime minister, and he began to understand how you could use television. In fact, it was the Queen's coronation, and Her Majesty wanted, for the first time, the coronation to be televised, and Churchill, when he was Prime Minister, didn't want that to happen, but she overrode Churchill on that. And Churchill himself was never, ever interviewed on television. He hated the idea of television. He called it a tuppenny halfpenny Punch and Judy show. But after the coronation, when the sale of sets doubled overnight, I remember myself, we had a set in our house, and most of the neighbours didn't have, and they all crowded in to watch the television on our 9-inch screen, which was seen as pretty good in those days. But Churchill saw the power of television and decided that he was going to have a secret screen test made to see how he would come over on television. He'd come over brilliantly and used radio brilliantly during the war and afterwards, but he'd never used television, and he wanted to see how this new invention really worked. And he got his broadcasting officer, a woman called Winifred Crumb Ewing. They were all called funny names like that in those days. And she didn't have much to do because he was never on television. But she arranged to do a secret film test to see what he looked like on television. And let me show you it. This is the Churchill screen test. Is the...
Yeah, it's coming.
I've come here not to talk to you, and certainly not to enable you to spread the tale all over the place, but just to enable me to see what are the conditions under which this thing they call TV is going to make its way in the world. I'm sorry, I must admit to have to descend to this level, but we all have to keep pace with modern improvement, and it's just as well to see where you are in regard to it. There's no point in refusing to move with the age, and therefore I have consented to come and have this exhibition, which is for one person and one person only. And only one person is going to judge what is to be done with this and what is to follow from it. I am that person. There you are. Here you see me. I am the one.
I am the one.
It was extraordinary. His contempt for television comes from, sorry to have to descend to this level, this thing they call TV. He made it sound like a sexually transmitted disease.
But that's quite remarkable, because he was a man who was very much knew about public persona, you know, the cigar,
exactly.
the siren suit, the overcoat, and even the victory sign. He knew how to play different kind of cameras, the photograph, and as
exactly.
you say, radio.
Yes, but interesting, he was nearly 80 when that was done, and he saw that Miss Crumb Ewing showed him the film, and he hated it and ordered her to destroy it. And I went to see her when she was in hospital, aged about 80 herself, and was talking to her about the film I was making about prime ministers and television. And she said, I had a secret screen test made. And he ordered me to destroy it, but I thought it was a historic document. So I've kept it ever since under my bed. Now, you seem a nice young man, a long time ago. If I give you the keys to my house, go up to the first floor, and the bedroom's on the first floor, and under the bed in a cardboard box is a film can which says Churchill screen test. And you can imagine our excitement when we got this. But Churchill himself hated, I suppose, because he was 80, he didn't like seeing him.
The famous Graham Sutherland painting as well, that he ordered to be destroyed.
Yes.
Because he hated it so much.
Exactly. he didn't want that. In fact, he would have come across on television fantastically, like a fist. He had that thing which successful television presenters have, a face shaped like a television screen. Trevor McDonald, David Dimbleby, they all have the face shaped like a television screen that fits in well, at least in those kinds of days. But so he never ever went on television. And the Labour Party, in the meantime, were beginning to understand about television. One of their young MPs was a former BBC producer called Tony Wedgwood Benn, but we're not talking about him. We're talking about Harold Wilson. Harold Wilson, in the 60s, he was elected leader of the Labour Party after Hugh Gaitskell's sudden death in January 1963. And he saw himself as the British JFK. JFK had been elected, and he was a fantastic role model because he understood about the media and how it worked. And Wilson sent for copies of JFK's press conferences, which were always rather humorous affairs. Harold Wilson hadn't been someone who was any good at jokes. I remember Gerald Kaufman said to me that when he was in the Oxford Labour Club in 1948, he got Harold Wilson to come down to speak to the Labour Club, and he was at the age of 29 president of the Board of Trade, and was the most boring speaker ever. But then he said he taught himself a sense of humour. He taught himself a sense of humour, and you'll see what I mean by that when I show you this clip. I'm not ready yet for it. I'll just introduce it. It's Wilson has been watching Kennedy, and he remembered about the Kennedy-Nixon debates, and he thought there should be the equivalent in Britain. He would be up against, first of all, Macmillan, and then it was Sir Alec Douglas Hume. And Wilson felt he personified the new Labour, New Britain, as he called it, young, born, the first potential Prime Minister born in this century. And so he looked at what was going on in America, and we can run the clip from there.
And the new president's progress was closely monitored across the Atlantic by the Labour Party leader. Harold Wilson, who used to holiday on the Scilly Isles, presented himself as the British JFK. Like Kennedy, Wilson saw TV as a way of reaching voters direct and bypassing the right-wing press.
What I think we're going to need is something like what President Kennedy had when he came in after years of stagnation in the United States. He had a program of 100 days of dynamic action.
The Tory Prime Minister, Sir Alec Douglas Hume, an old Etonian, was Harold Wilson's opponent in the 1964 general election.
My cameraman colleagues have asked me if you give one wave on the steps, sir. If I duck out of the way.
Hume had renounced his hereditary earldom to become Prime Minister. Harold Wilson had been to the White House to see Kennedy, hoping to catch some of the president's stardust. Claiming to represent the future like JFK, Wilson challenged Hume to the first ever TV election debate in Britain.
Have you decided, Prime Minister, whether to take part in some kind of television debate or confrontation with Mr. Wilson during the election campaign?
My first reaction to this is that the British election is something in which something over 600 constituencies have to decide the issues, and the issues are issues of policy. And therefore, I'm not particularly attracted by, so to speak, confrontations of personality. If we aren't careful, you know, you'll get a sort of, what's it called, top of the pops contest. I dare say I should win it, I'm not sure.
Yes, it's number one. It's top of the pops.
I'm not really very much attracted by this. You'll first then get the best actor as leader of the country, and the actor will be prompted by a scriptwriter. I'd rather have our old ways, really, and put our policies firmly in front of our people.
But if you decline Mr. Wilson's challenge, and after all, debate is between personalities is in the great British political tradition, might it not look as if you were running away?
Oh, no, I don't think so. After all, I debate with Mr. Wilson in Parliament. But I shall decide if I want to confront Mr. Wilson, not Mr. Wilson if he wants to confront me.
About a week ago, I saw the Prime Minister on television. It's a fact, I did. I'm just as much allowed to watch television as any of you. I have my favourite programmes, as you have. And this wasn't one of them.
Again, wonderful timing and knowing the pauses and everything. He was a fascinating television performer. I remember on the night of the 1964 election, very, very, very close, and a journalist said to him, "What do you feel like to be Prime Minister?" He said, "I feel like a drink."
But that point that Douglas Hume was making, I mean, that it would become about personalities,
absolutely,
politicians would become actors. I mean, that's something we still talk about. We talk about the presidentialism of our politics, that it's become too much about who's the good performer. And I mean, you criticised Boris Johnson at the beginning, but that was one of the charms of him as far as his party were concerned. Was Douglas Hume right?
Well, it was very, I think it was very prescient what he was saying, because Sir Alec Douglas Hume was often seen as, you know, the belted Earl and not very bright, but he actually saw a great deal when he was talking there. I thought that was interesting. Harold Wilson made fun of Sir Alec Douglas Hume, who had renounced his earldom, and Harold Wilson said he's the 14th Earl of Hume. And Alec Douglas Hume said, "Well, I suppose when you come to think of it, Mr. Wilson is the 14th Mr. Wilson," which is rather a good line. I think it may have been written for him by his speechwriter, who was Nigel Lawson.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to...
Which is a good segue into the Thatcher era.
The Thatcher era.
Yeah,
yeah, I made a number of films with Mrs. Thatcher over the years, and I made one later, after I'd made the ones during her time as Prime Ministership, called The Making of the Iron Lady, because we knew a great deal about her time as Prime Minister, but how she managed to come to become the first woman Prime Minister in the Western world, in a party not known for its generosity towards women. So let's run The Making of the Iron Lady. Yes, please. Oh, wrong.
Hello. How did the earlier thing go?
Can you stop?
Pardon? How did the earlier thing go?
Can you stop, please? You, without my permission, lost The Making of the Iron Lady, which was on the list. Well, I have a little list, and I've got it here. It's clip 4. Sorry about this. We had a technical problem, which is
1, 2,
good.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Well done, thank you.
Who do we want? Who do we need? Who is the leader who really can lead Maggie Thatcher? It's Maggie for me.
Strong as a rock, straight as a dime.
You might find it a bit difficult to believe, but that's the official Conservative campaign song for the general election. You might find it a bit difficult to believe, but that was me 25 years ago, making a film about Margaret Thatcher. The story of her time inside Number 10 has often been told, but tonight I'll be telling the far less familiar story of how she managed to fight her way to the top in a man's world to become the West's first ever female Prime Minister.
Has the will.
Thatcher. It's Thatcher for me.
2, 3, 4. Thatcher, Thatcher, Thatcher. Not a man around to match her.
Do you have any doubts at all about your ability to measure up to the job of Prime Minister?
Do I have any? Well, I look at some of the other people, and I really... Of course you have doubts. Of course you have doubts. And you're tremendously aware of the responsibility. But I just haven't come to this out of the blue.
Finchley Central is 2 and 6pence from Golders Green on the Northern Line.
Finchley in North London first elected Margaret Thatcher as its MP in the 1959 general election. It had taken her 10 years and numerous rejections before she found a winnable seat, for the odds were stacked against female politicians. And when the new member for Finchley took her seat, she found she was one of only 12 Tory women, while there were 350 Conservative male members. She appeared in an ITV programme called The Trouble with Men.
Men are the world's leaders, demanding jobs that require only the best, the finest, and the most enlightened men. A few women have managed to scramble under the crush barriers and join in the business of looking after England. One of them is Margaret Thatcher.
Well, we have to remember, as far as the British Parliament is concerned, that there are still only 25 women members out of a total of some 630 members of Parliament. So it's still not easy even to get elected as a woman member of Parliament.
There we go. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Seeing the changes that she...
Absolutely. And remember, when she did become leader of the Tory party, in the early days, they said she had all the charisma of a privet hedge, and that her voice was too posh. Her father, the grocer, had paid for her to have elocution lessons, and they decided that they had to do something about her voice being too posh and too shrill, they said. And they sent her to the National Theatre's voice coach, the one who'd coached Laurence Olivier when he played in Othello, to get his voice down. And the way you do it, apparently, is to say 20 times a day, "Nga cocker, nga cocker." So you don't speak from the front of your mouth, you speak from your throat. And she had a new kind of, it was seen as a rather sexy new voice. And in the 1983 election, I made a film during that election called The Marketing of Margaret. And one of the big events in that election was the interview that Sir Robin Day did with Margaret Thatcher. And I was on Panorama then, and when Robin went to Number 10 to do the interview, it was sent down the line to us, and I managed to get a VHS and put it in and record without Mrs. Thatcher or Robin Day knowing we were recording. So this is the big interview coming up for the election. And Mrs. Thatcher always, she thought they were really important, these big interviews. And I said to her once, how do you feel about those big interviews? And she said, I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. And there's a lot of tension that goes into the big interview, especially at that time. So now we'll show you the clip which I recorded, which they never ever knew about.
Gordon was absolutely terrific.
Next one,
he knew exactly.
Not this one. Right. Next one.
Hello.
Good morning,
How
Prime
did the
Minister.
earlier thing go?
Pardon?
How did the earlier thing go? You were on earlier with Michael.
Oh, yes, every morning. I've forgotten by that. Is it so lovely?
No, I'm
Very nice to see you.
excited.
Could I
You
call you?
always turn your mind to the next job in hand.
Of course, that programme is just...
It's all that spin doctors around there.
I mean, the candidates go to their headquarters.
Can you just tell me the order? Because I want to know whether I'm going to have to pick up.
It depends on your answers, because I don't like, keeping to a strict order, because it looks as though I'm ignoring some of your say. But basically, I'm just opening on a sort of general...
The subject matter.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, all these things overlap. But basically, I start off on a general political thing, and then a bit about unemployment. But the first, in the early bit, I'll do this business about your running on a phony manifesto.
Excuse me, can I clip this to...
We're not going to get on to crime, are we?
There might be a little bit on crime, but not a great section on it. Not a great section on it, but I think I can't escape it.
Yeah, what do? We're not doing Belgrano or anything like that, are we?
No,
right.
No, I don't regard that as an issue, frankly.
You should tell some of your colleagues. We're not doing Harvey Procter or anything like that, are we? National Front?
No, nothing about that.
And you have that away?
These are broad issues, big issues, the fundamentals. The destiny of the nation. Tell me when they're running the clock, because I want to set my watch so that it'll be on time. I've got to set my watch to the hour. You know.
How much?
40 minutes. Just a short chat.
First time he gets a smile.
You were on very good form this morning at the press conference.
Were you there?
No, I watched it on a television after I'd done Hazeltine. We go and had a feed. You see, there's a feed.
Sorry, I'm just going to take that off because it might bang on the table. Right.
One of the problems of doing that election call every morning is that I can't get to the press conferences. So I did on Monday, I did yesterday, and I will be able to on Thursday. Come on. Oh, yeah.
You can see it's quite tense, isn't it? I'd like to show you the whole interview, but I haven't got time for that. But it's quite interesting that she wanted to know the order, and he was prepared to give her the order.
But that's a pretty normal tactic of the presenter isn't going to tell them about the questions that they've got up.
Exactly.
Although this was a bit of a deferential time. I mean, Robin Day was criticised in the past for perhaps being too kind compared to today's interviewers. Where
yes, he was a lawyer by training, and it was often forensic questioning. But interestingly, he said to me when Mrs. Thatcher became more and more sort of practiced in the arts of not answering questions, he was off to do an interview with Mrs. T at number 10, and he said to me, why don't I ask her, Prime Minister, what's your answer to my first question? Because he knew whatever he asked, she would have been rehearsing with her spin doctor, Bernard Ingham, playing the role of a very ferocious Robin Day. But so I think we move...
Well, just before we turn to... I think we've got Blair and Campbell coming up next. But before we turn to that, I mean, I've got to ask, we've got a current Prime Minister who seems to have, in the sort of, development of her career, been trying to consciously echo Margaret Thatcher in some of the style. Do you see any similarities in their persona, in how they've come to power, anything like that?
Certainly not in the sophistication of how she has come to power. This is a woman who has been in every government since the Tories got to power, and never got sacked. And she's a lot of cabinet ministers did get sacked. Somehow, seamlessly, she has managed to move from one to the other. At the same time, making sure that she makes people think of Margaret Thatcher in terms of the way she dresses, in terms of going in a tank, all that kind of thing. It's been a very sophisticated campaign to get there, and has not really been sort of analysed and followed by people as it's been happening. I don't at all get the sense that she's like Mrs. Thatcher. And Mrs. Thatcher was a conviction politician, very convinced about her views. I think with Liz Truss, some of it seems to be making it up as she goes along and moving into a position where she thinks it will benefit her, from those wonderful clips of her at the Liberal Democrats conference and the anti-royalist and all that, to quite a right-wing figure now.
And somebody who hasn't always seemed very comfortable. I mean, you saw Thatcher almost in her heyday there, much more comfortable going into those kind of situations. Truss still, I think, certainly in terms of the speeches that she's been delivering, obviously in a very difficult sort of period coming to be Prime Minister, she's stuck to, what is her comfort zone. Whereas you see somebody, just to cue it up, like Tony Blair, very comfortable in front of the cameras, the consummate actor politician in a sense. Cue up his particular bits. I think we've got him and Alistair Campbell.
Yeah, if we could have the one before that, which is clip 8, if you've got that, and I would set that up. It's very short. Can we do that? I don't know who I'm talking to.
Opportunity and responsibility. They go hand in hand.
And in return for those opportunities, responsibility.
Not bigger government, but more effective government.
Not bigger government, better government.
New ideas for new challenges.
New challenges, new ideas.
Sometimes I hope it was Blair who would think of the line first.
And at the time of the next election, there will be just 1,000 days until the new millennium. 1,000 days to prepare for 1,000 years.
Tomorrow there will be just over 1,000 days until the year 2000. 1,000 days to build a bridge to a land of new promise. Let us seize those days and the century.
Yeah, you see, Clinton is so modest compared. Blair was going to seize the millennium, the whole millennium. It was like Hitler's millennium, the Third Reich, 1,000-year Reich, and Clinton just wanted a century. That's very, very modest. Blair himself, as we know, was a guy who really began to understand how modern media works, and especially with the help of Peter Mandelson and Alistair Campbell. I remember Peter Mandelson once came up to me at a party. He glid into the room. No one saw him enter, but then he was on your shoulder, and you only know that he's there next to you, lurking, that word, behind your shoulder, when there's a sudden chill in the air. And he said to me, "You do the things that's most important for a politician, Michael." I said, "What's that, Peter?" He said, "You make them appear human," and then glid away, just as I might have been able to say. Might be difficult with you, Peter, but he was gone, leaving only the faintest whiff of sulphur. But I was pestering Blair, whom I'd first filmed in 1982 when he was standing in the Hopeless for Labour safe Tory seat of Beaconsfield, and I saw this very, very young, very smiley public school boy, and I thought, I won't see him ever again. He lost by a landslide, but he was there again and was elected in '83. And New Labour came under a great deal of pressure about spin. And they thought it was the Tories reacting to the way New Labour had been so good at accusing the Tories of sleaze. And so spin was the new sleaze for the Tory party. And for about 6 years, I pestered Campbell, whom I knew a bit, and Blair to let us in to see how the Downing Street news machine operated. And eventually they let us in. So we'll show this clip.
I would have impressed today's indignant demonstrators.
Look, I just want to say on the
you see that?
Is this?
We didn't know.
Yeah, right. The health we here just have with GPs.
But the Tories make no apologies and say that is an accurate description.
What I want to do, really.
Ludicrous to suggest that serious politicians.
Do you often come to your press secretary's office?
I do if I'm passing, which I happen to be.
So how important is your press secretary to you?
Not at all.
How important is Alistair Campbell to you?
Of course, I mean, the press secretary is important for the Prime Minister. I mean, it would be odd if he wasn't, I think.
Yeah, but this particular...
Yeah, well, I mean, I like to think I've hired the best in the business. I hope I have, anyway. So, yeah, of course. But, a lot of twaddles talked about it as well.
Yeah, but everyone says the importance you put on relations with the media is greater than it's been with any government in the past.
I think it's just modern government now. Look, it's a 24-hour-a-day news media. If a story comes out that says something, and you haven't got the capacity to get on top of it and say, no, hang on, sorry, the facts are X and Y. And as you've probably discovered, I mean, it's not as if, these stories don't take a life of their own and then start running away into the far distance, and then the public thinks, oh my goodness, what on earth are they doing that for, when you're not doing it at all. It's important to have the capacity to get on top of the news insofar as it's possible, but it's less important to us than I think it is in the way that people perceive it.
And when they say in the papers who announced the Campbell, spend your whole time thinking about how you're going to win the next election, everything is planned and worked out to be spun in that sort of way.
I mean, it's just rubbish. Well, it's like, I was supposed to have spent my holidays with him last year or something. I mean, much as I like him, but no.
So why do you think the press don't believe this? Are they corrosively cynical?
I honestly don't know, and that's for you to do. But what is important for me is that it doesn't disturb me from doing the things that are really important in the end, which are, the things for the country. Otherwise, there's no point in doing this job. And people can believe that or not as they like, but that's what I spend my time thinking of.
So now you just spent 7 minutes talking to Michael Cockerell.
Classic example of a spin doctor blowing his own client out of the water. He said to me afterwards that he wished he'd bitten his lip. Then that's why he spent the last 7 minutes talking.
It's fascinating because I remember that from watching the documentary, and I always assumed Campbell had told Blair knew, and he'd purposefully come in to sort of do that bit, talk about sort of the role of Campbell, defend himself and so forth. But you say it was just purely accident that he...
Well, I'd said to Campbell that we weren't getting enough interaction between him and the Prime Minister, and he said the problem is if I tell him you're going to be there, then he goes all stiff. He sometimes comes into my office, and if you happen to be filming in my office, you might catch him. And he comes in and didn't realise that we were there. And I took the opportunity to doorstep him in his own office. But a lot of the press coverage of it said that it looked as if that Blair in shirt sleeves was the sort of naughty schoolboy coming into the headmaster's study rather than the other way around. And I remember that the next day I happened to be playing in a charity cricket match where Rory Bremner, the impressionist, was, and he said, I'm watching that film frame by frame. And he and another guy who played Alistair Campbell got their body language and their voice absolutely right after
him
that.
Doing the classic Blair hand movement, yeah. I mean, Blair did bring a new way of thinking about sort of political handling of the press to government, didn't he? And Alistair Campbell was a big part of that, but I think it was also Blair's ability in front of the cameras.
Yes. I mean, he from the first, the the Labour Party and Mandelson in particular, well before Blair was anything other than an up-and-coming MP, would put him on television because this was a new, fresh face of Labour. And he became very experienced about it all, but I remember going to film him in the run-up to the Iraq War, and it was about 6 months before the Iraq War, and the number 10 line was that no decisions have been taken, and I was doing a film about Anglo-American relations, and I said to Blair, an American Secretary of State said the definition of the special relationship for the Americans is, are the Brits going to be there when the shooting starts? Are the Brits going to be there? And Blair said, exactly, they don't want warm words of consolation. They want to know, are you going to commit your troops? I said, this American Secretary of State had said, yeah, they want to know, are the Brits prepared to pay the blood price? And Blair said, that's exactly what the relationship is. And the next day in all the papers, it was, Blair says we'll pay the blood price. And I remember walking out of number 10 and thinking, within 6 months we'll be at war.
All right, well, I'm conscious of time, so let's turn to another person who seemed quite comfortable in front of the cameras, perhaps less so towards his end of time of office. But I think your last few clips are about Boris Johnson in particular.
Yeah. So I made a film about Boris Johnson. I don't know which one do you say you've got?
I can't remember which one was up first.
I think it should be clip 11.
Which is that the one of him? Was it one?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. This was a film.
This is. We've got that ready. Got the thumbs up.
Good.
This is him, obviously, well before.
Yeah. He's mayor of London, this was a film I made called Boris Johnson: The Irresistible Rise. And one of the things, just before you play it, one of the things I do, which will be illustrated in this, is I get together clips of their previous life on television, because almost all politicians, especially when it's early film or early TV shows, have never seen themselves on television. They're working in the evenings, and it wasn't that easy to get recordings in those days. And you show them film from their early life, and they get absolutely fascinated. And I remember when I was doing a film about Ken Clark, I said, I'll show you this stuff, and you probably won't have seen some of it. And just react naturally. He says, you mean you want me to sit here and shout at the television like I do at home? I said, you've got it in one. And I showed Boris a clip here, which he hadn't seen, which is quite memorable. Okay.
Gold, silver, bronze medals, then you need to bail out Greece and Spain together. Final question. Can we put on the greatest Olympic Games that has ever been held in any city? Can we?
Well, I was very lucky to be mayor at the time of the Olympic Games, is all I can say. And it was a jammy old trick to pull.
But what was it like for you to hear that huge crowd chanting, Boris, Boris, Boris?
Very, very bad for you. I mean, don't do it. I mean, I'm very, very bad for the ego. But you do understand why Roman emperors put on great games and great spectacle. I mean, suddenly you're thinking, wow, this is obviously a big thing. So, you know.
So, I mean, would you like to be a Roman emperor?
No. They invariably came to sticky ends.
He'd fly through the air with the greatest of ease, a daring young man on the flying trapeze. His movements were graceful, for girls he could please, and my love.
A sticky end was the mot juste for Johnson's celebrated trip, which climaxed with the daring young mayor stuck on the zip wire.
I want you to know it's going well. It's very, very well organised. Get me a ladder.
I want you to know that was far more painful and frightening than you might think.
In what way?
Because it was, to start with, it was jolly high up. And after you stuck up there for a while, stuff starts to chafe and so on and so forth.
Well, around your groin?
I don't want to go into these details, Michael. I mean, it was chafing was involved, but...
I thought you wrote in your book.
Did I? Right.
Yeah. So I'm only quoting you, Boris. This is what's so difficult. I quote you.
I can never remember what I've written. Okay.
You said it got very, very tight around your groin area.
Did it? Right. Well, if that's why I wrote in my book, it must be absolutely correct.
If any other politician anywhere in the world got stuck on a zip wire, it would be, disastrous. For Boris, it'll be an absolute triumph. There's he defies all forms of gravity.
What have we got for our next clip?
Yeah.
You can see that just in what Cameron says, that relationship between these two guys who kind of grew up together, were at Eton at the same time, were at Oxford at the same time, and.
But also, that was a time when Cameron was quite comfortable with Boris Johnson's position.
Yes. That's why he made him.
Unlike Theresa May, he didn't have to face him as quite the same immediate.
No, exactly. He decided he wanted to get a candidate for Mayor of London, and if he could persuade Boris to stand, he'd lose, of course, they thought, to Ken Livingstone, because you couldn't beat Ken Livingstone in London by being a Tory. And Boris himself, I know from what his sister told me at the time, that Boris thought it was a trap by Cameron to get him off out of Parliament and not being a contender for the Tory leadership.
All right, a bit more on Boris Johnson. I think you've got clip 17.
Clip 17.
I can't remember which one this is at this point.
Okay, this is the Newsnight film on the eve of Boris becoming Prime Minister.
Would you like to be Prime Minister?
I think it's a very tough job being Prime Minister. Very tough job. I mean, obviously, if the ball came loose from the back of a scrum, which it won't, or of course it'd be a great thing to have a crack at, but it's not going to happen.
The human bulldozer who snatched the ball from the back of the Tory scrum is a man of many contradictions. A classical scholar turned popular entertainer, a self-proclaimed liberal one-nation Tory, hand in glove with the hardline Brexiteers.
There's a spectrum of opinion about him. One is that he will be the most unsafe pair of hands ever to open a prime ministerial red box. And at the other end, people think here is a man of brilliance and flair who can suddenly, like an alchemist, turn the base metal of Brexit to something shiny and remarkable.
So who is the real Boris Johnson? What makes him tick? And what kind of fist will he make of the job he has craved since he was a boy? This is Boris Johnson, age 5, paddling his own canoe. He grew up the eldest of 4 children in the hugely competitive Johnson family.
He knows that life is a competition, and he always wants to be top. Whenever anyone asked him what he wanted to be, he would answer world king. That is true.
He painted this self-portrait at the age of 12 and downgraded his ambition to becoming British Prime Minister. He was off to Eton, where he became a star of the school plays and discovered he could make people laugh. Do you think that you learnt something for later life from acting in plays at Eton, that you could actually get more laughs by looking as if you don't know your lines than actually remembering them?
Well, I certainly think that as a general tactic in life, if that's what you're driving at, it is often useful to give the slight impression that you are deliberately pretending not to know what is going on, because the reality may be that you don't know what is going on, but people won't be able to tell the difference.
This is why he's dementing for other politicians, because they're all, to an extent, playing a part assigned to them by the party. You know, you have to be loyal, you have to be a good Tory. Boris has realised quite early on that he would go further if he broke all those rules, and people would love him even more.
And we've got one last clip, I think, which is clip 18. And this was also came from that film on the eve of him becoming Prime Minister. I was going to show you the film I made, which you may have seen, about his time as Prime Minister, but for technical reasons we couldn't get it. But this is a very good substitute. This is the end of the film about him on the eve of him becoming Prime Minister, and you will see Sir Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Churchill and an old Etonian and friend of Boris Johnson, who starts by talking about Boris's time as Foreign Secretary and what that did for him.
I think he had a chance to prove to the world and to himself, to his friends and supporters, that he would be an outstanding, he could do a really big job at a very difficult time, which it was, and in my view, he failed. So that, again, also gives me cause for anxiety and worry. It doesn't alter the fact that he's extremely agreeable to have dinner with.
Sir Nicholas Soames is the grandson of Sir Winston Churchill. And Boris Johnson recently wrote a biography of Churchill in which he pointedly noted that Churchill was a journalist turned politician with many human flaws who was written off but called in to save his country in its darkest hour. Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson is now about to become Britain's 55th Prime Minister and the 20th Old Etonian, with many people questioning his ability to handle the most daunting and difficult of jobs in the most forbidding political environment since the Second World War. Do you have any doubts about your ability to fulfil the role of Prime Minister?
I think people who don't have doubts or anxieties about their ability to do things probably have something slightly terrifyingly awry. We all have worries and insecurities, but I think I think we've done a pretty good job so far in City Hall, and that's what I want to continue to do.
Boris has a vision for the country, and this energy and this optimism which the British people are longing to feel, because he believes in the future. He is an optimist, and an optimist is catching. It's like a smile, it's catching. You share it like a cold. You look at it and you smile too. He's not fazed by difficult. In fact, I think the harder the challenge, the more we'll get out of him as Prime Minister Boris.
My biggest single worry, perhaps, about Boris Johnson is that he seems to me to be a politician who has inhaled his own legend before he's created it. He's shown levels of personal and political narcissism which do worry me. And it's as if he believes in his own myth. My own feeling veers towards the anxiety end of the spectrum. I hope I'm wrong, but it certainly does veer towards the anxiety end of the spectrum, because you cannot busk being Prime Minister.
I texted him last weekend, and I said to him, when Churchill became Prime Minister, on the day he became Prime Minister, he went back to his flat where he met my grandmother and his children, and they drank a bottle of champagne. And he proposed a toast, which I quoted to Boris, of here's to not buggering it up. And I said to Boris, I can't possibly vote for you. I can't vote for you. But I pray for all our sakes, you don't bugger it up. And that is my hope for Boris.
And your fear?
My fear is that he could bugger it up.
End of film. Yeah. So,
quite something. All right, let's just, I've got a couple of questions on from our audience at home, and sorry if you couldn't see all of the videos there. Obviously, many of them in the back catalogue across the BBC. So somebody's asked, who did you find was the most intelligent Prime Minister, and in your opinion, and why? And I guess that's interesting in the context of what we're talking about, of that ability to understand media in its different forums.
Yes. I mean, there's a difference between understanding media and being intelligent. What was it Roy Jenkins said about Tony Blair, that he didn't have a first-class mind, but he had a second-class mind, but a great deal of charm. And maybe that's more useful for being Prime Minister. He wasn't sure. Who did I find that the most intelligent? This is a very good question.
Well, we can come back to it. If we've got questions in the room, we can probably manage to squeeze a couple in, if anyone's got anything. Perfect, too. Yeah. If you could say who you are and organisation for anyone watching at home, that would be fantastic.
Will Stark from the City of London Corporation. Where do you see your documentary making between a contemporaneous record and history writing?
Very interesting. Should we take the other question at the back? I'll keep a note of them in case we...
Hi, Teresa Potocka, Sense of Future Pictures. I actually work in the television space. I just wondered, as I am quite involved in doing similar things to what you've been doing over the years, and I just wondered what advice you'd give to someone who's early in this space, and also when you were involved in the secret world of Whitehall, what could you and couldn't you do, and what is it that kept you sort of, on course? Thank you.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I've been lucky enough over the years is to manage to get access to places that you normally are not allowed to film. And I think it sort of builds on itself. If you do make films, kind of what you're talking about, contemporary history films, and people see it and they know, hopefully, that they're not going to be stitched up. I always try never to use the techniques of television against anyone. It's so easy. It's getting even much easier than it's ever been in terms of what you can do digitally to make people say almost anything you want. But I refuse to do anything like that. I always like to make a film where the people afterwards, they may not sort of like it very much, but they recognize that it's an attempt at balance, that it's a fair picture, that they haven't been stitched up. In terms of your question, were you saying, where am I on contemporary history? I mean, it is contemporary history. And what I try and do is get people often while they're still in office to a lot of them. I remember Jack Straw, when he was Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary, he said, I like doing your interviews because every other interview is just a news bite, but you make me think of what's going on and what I'm doing and a wider world than the narrow world of the normal TV interview. And they quite enjoy that. Yeah, I hope it is I remember Peter Riddle, Sir Peter Riddle, Obi,
yes.
The Right On, many, all of those.
Recently
who used to be
yeah.
a humble hack like me. But he once wrote about one of my films. He said that often my films are much more revealing about what politicians are really up to than their self-serving memoirs ever are, and that you get more sense of what our politicians are really like. I mean, some people in the room might remember a guy called Bob Mackenzie, Professor Bob Mackenzie, who was famous. He was an LSE academic and also famous for his swingometer. And he once said to me, imagine if there were films of Gladstone and Disraeli, and I thought, I'm going to make the films about today's Gladstone and Disraeli, because we know a lot about what Disraeli and Gladstone looked like. We even know a tiny bit about what, there's a very scratchy recording in 1896 of Gladstone talking, but we know not anything about what they would really have been like on television, their body language, and what kind of people they really were. We know a fantastic amount about their politics, but not about them as human beings. So
and it's changed now even more, because, I mean, even for a lot of the period you're talking about, there was a certain amount of control for politicians that they knew when they were on camera, at least. They had agreed to do an interview, they'd agreed to do a documentary, whereas now anyone with a camera phone can catch you unawares.
Yes.
So that sort of media performance, as it were, you're almost never off.
No, that's
it's almost
right.
Constant.
Yeah, and the way it then gets magnified on social media in extraordinary ways. I never know what the reaction to my film will be. I remember I won great stars with my many daughters when they were watching one of, it was the Boris film they were watching with many of their school friends, because Boris was a fascinating figure for them. And my daughter said to me, "Dada, you're trending on Twitter." And they looked at me with new respect after that.
Wonderful. I've got a quick question from me. I mean, we've talked about what a tumultuous few years it has been. You've had, obviously, unparalleled access to Whitehall at various times for various documentaries. Is there a particular moment, a particular department in the last few years that you just wish you'd been there with the cameras?
Yeah, I'd like to have been in the Treasury with Rishi Sunak, very definitely, and I'd like to have also expanded that to see how Rishi Sunak was making absolutely sure he would be the next Prime Minister. He was doing a bit of chancelling, but he was doing a great deal of image building and not really noticing that there was someone else doing the same thing.
Yeah,
that would have been fascinating.
Probably have to wait for the memoir, self-serving or otherwise, to find out about. Okay, we're going to have to draw it to a close now, out of time. Thank you very much, Michael, for joining us tonight. Your book is available, which covers your memoirs, and we've got a few copies outside as well.
It's called Unmasking Our Leaders, Confessions of a Political Documentary Maker, and there are a lot of stories which I haven't told tonight.
Looking forward to reading it myself. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you at home for watching. We will be visiting the party conferences for the next 2 weeks, so do have a look at our website if you want to see the events that we're holding there if you're coming to party conference. But also, watch out, we will be doing different form of media. We will be doing Twitter spaces from the party conferences, giving a bit of live IFG analysis of how we're finding it, whether we've managed to eat anything, get any sleep, and so forth. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you very much for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you.